Welcome back in, everybody, to a Wednesday edition of Birds 365. Joined now by our weekly Wednesday guest, Mike Gill from 97.3 ESPN down the shore, the best sports talk show in South Jersey. Mike Gill, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Morning, guys. What's going on?
Michael, how are you? Boy, it must be nice down there this time of year. It's like 1,000 degrees up here every day, Mike. So at least you guys are getting a little bit of cool breezes down there. So I encourage everybody to go down there. And when you're down there, listen to.
Don't come down. We don't need any more people down here.
Oh yeah, you don't want people down here. I apologize. I'm trying to pimp your show, Mike. I'm trying to pimp your show.
Yeah, download our app. You can listen on the app. We don't.
There we go.
No, just kidding. It was a madhouse down here this week, man. I lived down here my whole life. It was as crazy as I've ever seen it. But I'll tell you what, a lot of people talking Eagles down here.
Yeah, it's getting closer. I do think the Phillies are so good. People are taking a more relaxed approach, maybe than typically.
Yeah, I mean the injuries to the Phillies, and then you got the All-Star break coming up. So this All-Star break is going to kind of coincide right when the training camps open. Baseball did a bad job yet again.
Yeah, they always do a bad. They seem to always do a bad job with that stuff.
I don't understand. Like, why not make the All-Star game like around the 4th of July? Like, have like 4th of July All-Star festive something there, because you're taking this whole week off. I mean, the Houston Texans report Saturday, for God's sakes. I mean, so you have a team reporting. Baseball's taking the week off, and all these teams are starting to report. You kind of get lost in the sauce. I know the Eagles are a little bit further down the road than that. You know, the Hall of Fame game is August 1st.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I mean, football is literally, my girlfriend said to me this morning, she's like, I feel bad. My other son, he's 15. He's like, he's got nothing to do. He can't work. He's not old enough. She goes, but the summer's almost over. I was like, what? The summer's almost over. So, yeah, the Eagles are here, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. All-Star, you and I probably had that discussion. Boy, I used to love All-Star games when I was a kid. I used to love the Major League Baseball All-Star game. I love the NBA All-Star game. Never loved the Pro Bowl. Football's not a game that lends itself to an All-Star format. But I still love those, and now I hate them, Mike.
What do you think of Joe Burrow's idea?
Yeah,
I thought that was pretty good. I mean, if you're gonna increase anyway, I thought that was decent.
Yeah, Joe got in trouble because the players are like, "Come on, don't give up any negotiating leverage to get to that 18th game." But I don't even care about the Pro Bowl. I literally don't care. So whether it happens in the season, out the season, and that goes with all All-Star games. And I kind of figured
play the game anymore, right? They don't play that game.
No, they don't. It's now the Pro Bowl games, just a skill competition and all that kind of stuff. And they play a flag football game, I think. But yeah, good. I've advocated for years, scrap the game, but keep the honor, because the honor is very important for the players. But the game was an abject disaster. I think the same thing with baseball in the NBA, and I kind of figured it out. I liked it because I was a child. I think that's what it's for. It's for the kids. Yeah. I think adults are like, what are we doing here? Why are we stopping the regular season? What?
The baseball game is still an actual game. I mean, they're not trying to strike out. The pitcher's trying to strike you out. So they're still playing the game as we see it normally. Whereas in basketball, that's just turned into a complete pickup game. The hockey game, they've changed so many. I don't even know what they used to be 3-on-3. They had these little pods they were doing. But the baseball game is still a real game. I was listening to a conversation about this last night, but it's like the game has changed so much, and the players are now so new that many people don't know who they are.
Yeah, and they do a bad job with that too. Yeah, they do a bad job with marketing. But I mean, back in the day, for real old heads, you remember Pete Rose, who'd he run over at the plate? I forget the catcher's name. They're really trying to win these games. For the National League had like a 13-game winning streak, some outrageous number. It was like a big bragging rights deal. It was like a big deal. Now it's like it's forgotten the minutes. It's over.
Yeah.
I would argue it's forgotten before it even started. But all right, good tangent there. We'll get it back
Well,
to
the
the
All-Star
Eagles.
game's coming to Philly in 2 years.
Yeah, and nobody will care. Well, people here will care for a very brief period of time. The Eagles are coming though, and they'll be here in 2 weeks from today. Will be the first practice, Mike. I asked this yesterday. I asked it to you. If Howie Roseman's going to do one thing before the start of camp, a couple of years ago, you remember he got Steven Nelson right before camp. There's always that seemingly adjustment. What do you want him to add?
I would imagine. Well, what do I want him to add, or what do I think he would add?
What do you want? Both. What do you want, and what do you think they're going to do?
Because I do think they will add something else. I do think this is an unfinished product, and I would imagine that there are a couple of safeties that kind of fit the mold and fit the scheme that know Vic Fangio that are still kind of hanging around out there. Two in particular who are veteran players that probably, if you brought them in, maybe Simmons would probably be a starting level player, I would imagine, still, unless he's completely lost a step. I don't know about Eddie Jackson, if he's still 100% definitively would be your starter stepping right in, or would he fill more of that third safety role. But I think that spot would be the one, because there's not a whole heck of a lot of depth there. I wonder if you're still waiting to see what Sidney Brown looks like when he gets out on the field and starts running around. Is he going to be somebody that can do anything at training camp, or do you get to the point where you say, we can't trust that he's going to be ready, so we're going to have to bring somebody else in? So I would think the safety spot, with the combination of the lack of depth, the uncertainty, and who's available, they would be that triangle of reasons would make that the most suitable answer. And the other, on the offensive side of the ball, I would imagine they're probably still trying to kick the tires on someone to play the slot, and to see if they can find somebody more suitable. I figure you'll bring the guys in that you have. They have a couple rookies that they might want to take a longer look at, see how they get, acclimated when they get to camp. And if they can't trust those guys, they probably start kicking the tires at that position.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good ones, Mike Gill. I want to go to the defensive side of the ball. What do you think of Reed Blankenship? Johnny Mack and I have been kicking this around because obviously you're seeing Justin Simmons and you're seeing all sorts of names popping up for who the Eagles should target. They seem to like Reed Blankenship. They went out of their way to get the deal done with him so that he'll be here another year. How do you think they view him in this defense as a starting safety?
It's interesting because I think we all just assume that he is not a starting level safety. He's a third safety. He's a really good third safety. And then the Eagles go out and give him a new contract, which says they like him. I don't know. He's not a flashy guy. And maybe that's like people the year before, there were so many turnovers from that spot with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson with all of those interceptions. And look, the Eagles safety position has had some solid guys. Rodney McLeod, of course, you had Malcolm Jenkins there for all those years. Dawkins played the spot. So oddly, it has been kind of a really good position in Philadelphia, but then it's had some weird downturns. And I feel like he's not on the level of those guys. And he doesn't do anything like, he has an interception here. He's just kind of a guy that's unflashy. And usually those guys, and it's weird because you would think that he's that tough guy. He's always around the ball. He's just not a spectacular type of guy. So he's an interesting one. It's not like I feel like people are calling for him to be replaced. Are people like, you got to get him out of there?
Well, I think a lot of people are like, you got to get Simmons. And
because there's an option. That's the thing. It's because there's an option. But if Reed Blankenship, it's not like, hey, we think this guy, it's not like, where you have a guy that just, you got to get this guy out of here. You have to replace him. I don't think people are saying that Blankenship is so bad that he needs to be replaced. It's that there's a guy that is out there that they deem to be better.
Now, by the way, PFF, Reed Blankenship, the 19th best safety in football last season. Justin Simmons was 42nd.
Yeah.
But I think it's about pedigree. I think it's about pedigree because he's undrafted. Now, the Eagles are already sort of hinted what the Eagles like Reed Blankenship. I'm not talking about the organization. I'm talking about outside the organization. They bought out his essentially what they did is they bought out his restricted free agency year. There's no reason to do that other than you think he's a starting player. And they gave him pretty significant money. Because
he's also
if
been
you think
hurt. He's also been hurt both years. He's had some injury issues.
Yeah, but they were he missed and it's a big deal, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you want to see him. He missed 3 games last year. And they were all different injuries. So we missed one game, here, not in a row. So they haven't been significant. And I think mainly if you look at those games, Mike, the Eagles defense, which was pretty poor to begin with, Reed was one of the best players on the team. They really, you could really see the loss of him.
So
look at the playoff game. The playoff game was one of them. They were a disaster in the playoff
last week. Slay had said, the lack of communication, the safety position, there was a lot of, is he part of that or is that the other guy's role?
Well, I think lack of communication throughout. It's, I think the safety has more responsibility, but Xander knows, Jody knows, I've been talking forever. When you're playing the Fangio scheme, the most important thing to me is communication on the back end. And when you don't communicate, you're going to look bad. And you saw it in the Super Bowl when they were good, when they were blowing coverages at the end of the Super Bowl. It looks really bad. Last year, they had a lot of problems. It had to do with the safeties. It had to do with the corners. It had to do with the slot guys. But I think it was more the other guys than it was Reed. And I think the Eagles have indicated that they did the same thing with TJ Edwards. Now, the big thing is when TJ got past, they bought out TJ's restricted free agency year. And then it became, all right, you got to pay him significant money for the linebacker, and they didn't want to go there. So I think after 2025, I got to think about what year we're in, 2025. And then it will be, if Reed continues to play well like TJ did, then they'll have to pay him significant money. Will they be willing to do that at that point? But right now, they have highlighted, because think about it, Mike. If you think he's a backup, he's an undrafted kid. He plays the season. He gets to restricted free agency. You see, all right, what do you want to do? And you go about it that way. You don't extend him. That is a key. Same thing with TJ. They don't do it a lot. But when they're buying out that restricted free agency year, that means they've identified him as being a starting safety. And obviously, CJ is going to be a starting safety. And that's why I say Justin Simmons, I got to believe that somebody is going to give him a starting job.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't see the fit here.
Yeah, that's why I feel more inclined to them just waiting to see how Brown kind of looks. What else do they have back there? Gardner, I guess, is somebody they moved to that spot. I guess you can take a look at Avonte Maddox over there with all the crowdedness in that room. If they feel that somebody else can handle that slot spot, I guess Avonte Maddox could be a candidate to shift.
Now, what about James? Maybe James
Bradbury
safety is real. Maybe. I don't think so, because he makes a same thing
real,
with
maybe.
Well, I'm doing it more in devil's advocacy type thing.
I totally forgot, that he's in the mix there as well, to be honest with you. So if that's real, then I guess he's in the mix there too.
Well, you don't want to pay a backup what Bradbury makes. And by the way, a backup who isn't going to play on special teams. I mean, that's why I'm playing devil's advocate. I think Howie's kicking the can down the road as far as he possibly can to get whatever conditional 7th round, conditional 6th round pick. But I can't imagine they carry him on the 53 as a backup safety. I can't imagine it.
I mean,
So
my
more
biggest
likely he
concern
gets
with the
cut.
whole safety is not even the talent. I feel good about CJ Gardner-Johnson. I feel pretty good about Reed Blankenship. I think Sidney Brown is going to have another ascending season, showing he can be a starting caliber safety in the league. But none of them have stayed healthy ever. So that's the biggest concern there. And when you talk about guys like Justin Simmons, John, you've pointed that out on the show many times. He's probably going to want to be a starting safety. I think it's better for us to add a depth piece that's more versatile, can play special teams, than it is to go for a guy like Justin Simmons, who, you know, is going to be looking for that starting role. I don't know if that's what's needed in that room.
But also keep in mind, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's been hurt a lot. He got
Yeah,
hurt
that's
in
what I
Philly.
said. Yeah, I mean, everybody in that room, Mike.
Yeah.
Sidney got hurt, Reed got hurt, and Chauncey.
And Chauncey missed almost all of last year. He missed 6 games here the year before. So he is a guy that you really, you know, haven't been able to count on either.
No, that's very true. And that's an interesting position. You also brought up wide receiver 3. That to me is a bigger need because, look, I talk about it all the time with injuries. These are injury prone players. Certainly you can say that with CJ. Reed, as you mentioned, has missed games, you know, not in a row, but still when you're not on the field, that's impactful. So you can worry about it, but there's not much you can do about it as far as legislating injuries. I talk about that all the time. But wide receiver 3 is a bigger concern for me because I just don't think they're good enough. I think they're good enough at safety if the guys are out there. If CJ's out there, if Reed's out there, I think they're good enough to win football games. That third wide receiver, I don't think is good enough. I don't. And whether it's Paris Campbell or John Ross or Anaya Smith, a rookie, they seem not to willing to give Britton Covey an opportunity. I don't know. Could this be the linebacker? If you go back to last year in the linebackers, you remember the Eagles came to camp and then all of a sudden they saw, all right, we're just not good enough. And here comes Zach Cunningham and Miles Jack. Could that be the type of situation you have at wide receiver 3?
Probably. Yeah. And like, it's one of those things where, hey, we'll give what we have a chance to kind of somebody separate themselves. And if nobody does, we'll see who ends up becoming available from these other organizations. Maybe someone doesn't have a fit here, cap guy there, similar to like what's Bradbury's going through. Last year, they end up finding Julio Jones sometime deeper into the season. I don't know if they would have wait that long. Do you think they get to the start of the season with what they have, knowing that they have an issue at that spot? We'll see. But yeah, I definitely think that, you know, who was the guy who retired on them?
Devontae Parker. Yeah,
Parker,
people
right.
forget about that.
People forget about Parker. I think he was probably the guy they were kind of counting on to kind of fill that spot. He was a guy, you know, that was a first-round pick. And much like they did a couple of years ago when they won that Super Bowl, they took a swing on some guys who had kind of some injury issues and some, you know, down seasons, and they brought it. Patrick Robinson's one that really stands out there. That was a guy who really hadn't lived up to his potential. They signed him, they put him in the slot, and really had probably his best year of his career here for that one season.
Oh my God, he was unbelievable. He was the best slot corner in football. That is an interesting story, by the way, because boy, and a lot of the guys who were covering the team then will tell you, he had such a bad training camp. He almost had a nervous breakdown. I've never seen anything like it. It was just out of left field. He was so bad, and all of a sudden, you know, the Eagles were playing him a lot outside. All of a sudden, they said, "All right, let's try him in the slot," and boom, he just took off. He was unbelievable to the point he got a big contract after the season. The Eagles had to make the decision that, you know, is this we talked about all the career years the Eagles had in 2022. You and I have talked about that a lot, Mike. We brought that up again yesterday with the hatred of Jonathan Gannon. Even if Gannon was back for all the, even if the, you know, TJ was back and Marcus Epps was back and Kaiser White and everybody else, Javon Hargrave, they weren't going to have the same season because so many guys had career years. It just doesn't
think about
look
it.
like
Think about it from this aspect. We were talking about this with the Phillies. Suarez and Sanchez have been so good the first half of the season. Can you really expect them to duplicate what they did in the first half of the season in the second half of the season, and then take it to football with these guys? Like, some of these guys have, really, really good seasons, but through that season, you take a beating, and can you really expect some of those guys to duplicate or get better, from what they did the year before? And that's where that team that went to the Super Bowl, you were saying, man, every guy on that defense had the best year that they ever had. Are they better than that? And if they're not better than that, is that a problem? And we found out that if they weren't better than that, yes, it was a little bit of a problem for some of these guys, that they couldn't match the player they were the year before. And the defense really suffered from both sides. Really, I mean, talk about Jalen Hurts. Can he be the player that he was that year? No, he wasn't that guy. He took a step back. Did that mean he was terrible? No, but the year before, he was so good that you got to the Super Bowl. So if you can't match that level, I mean, there's only few guys that can hit that level of consistent play, and they're the true greats of the game. And if you're not one of those, it's not a knock on you, but there's very few guys that can maintain that level of consistency and play at that high of a level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mike, how creative do you think Kellen Moore is going to be in that, shuffling receivers around? I've thought about maybe
putting around. I don't know that he has any to pick from.
I know, but that's where I wonder, like, should they sign a slot receiver or should they sign a guy that can, be the outside if they want to move AJ or Devontae into the slot? Kind of give them a little bit more ability to be creative if you already have a slot guy in Paris. I know he's not great, but Paris Campbell or somebody like that who can play the slot, go pick up somebody that's a little more versatile. Or is it Johnny Wilson or somebody like that that's already here on the roster that we're not thinking of?
Well, those guys all remain to be seen. I mean, nobody, I think, can really make any sort of assertion on what they think these rookies. I mean, they're two completely different guys. It's not like they brought two guys in very similar and said, may the best man win. They brought in a big guy and a small guy and said, all right, let's see what these guys.
Like a couple years ago, it was Quez Watkins and John Hightower. That was like kind of same type of guy.
Two guys with a lot of speed. Those two guys both had.
Yeah, different, but they were same. That's
but they were different sizes. So I don't know. Listen, and I don't know what the snap counts are on offense for these. Well, I can't imagine Brown and Smith, unless there's an injury, are off the field very much. I think those guys are pretty much. So in terms of what he does with the wide receiver room, I guess he's trying to find a guy to get comfortable with in that slot role. But those two guys, the rest of those guys, it's a good question on if somebody got hurt, which of those guys would be the guy that they would use out there. And if it's Paris Campbell, then if he's the slot guy, which of those guys is the next slot guy and is he even capable to play? They certainly have a lot of questions there, but let's be honest, this is a lot predicated on the two guys that they have. And I would imagine, Dallas Goedert is a guy that's kind of being forgotten about. He's been hurt. He hasn't kind of lived up to. Somebody texted into my show the other day and said, at what point is Dallas Goedert just LJ Smith?
Come on.
Well, no.
Did he yell? I hope he yelled at him.
The point they made was LJ Smith was a guy that people thought had a lot of potential, but he just never lived up to it. And that Dallas has a lot of potential, but his injuries just keep kind of playing a role in why he hasn't become to where, like, hey, we keep saying this is the big year for Dallas Goedert, and then he doesn't have the big year. Oh, this is the big year for Dallas Goedert.
It's funny because I'm writing about the tight ends today. So in my training camp preview for Sports Illustrated, but when it comes to Dallas, but the thing about, and I hope you yelled at that texter, I really do, because the thing about Dallas is, a lot of people thought maybe he could join sort of that elite status with Travis Kelce and George Kittle and Mark Andrews, most notably. And he hasn't reached that level. But everybody knows how good he is in the NFL. He's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. He's one of the few true old school tight ends who could play in line and be a flex receiver. He's more like Kittle than Kelsey. He's a really good player. The problem here is, yes, injuries. He misses a couple games every year. It's never drastic. Probably the biggest one would have been that injury in Chicago during the Super Bowl season, which was the glenoid bone in the shoulder, which I never heard of before Dallas injured it. So there's injury problems, no doubt about it, but he's a really good player. Now, the problem when it comes to the numbers, people, and that's what people are looking at, unfortunately, you got AJ and Devontae. I mean, they're getting most of the traffic when it comes to
Super Bowl year. He
passing
was
game.
on pace for 1,000 yards before he got.
Yeah, he had a very good year.
Yeah.
Well, 2021, I think,
was his best.
One of the years.
Yards,
yeah, one of the years he was on pace for.
Yeah,
They
it
would
was
have had
at
3.
800 or something.
Yeah,
He's a really good player. And no, he hasn't reached where some thought he could be. You still have the concentration drops, which get a little bit frustrating. Seems to have 1 or 2 of those a year. He's a great yards after catch guy of Jalen. And remember, Jalen Hurts throwing the football over the middle of the field isn't the strength of Jalen Hurts. He's not comfortable doing it.
It's
He doesn't
interesting
do it a
John,
lot.
you say that because like Jalen's first year starting, Dallas Goedert had 830 yards, and the main reason is because he had 15 average yards per catch. Last year he had the
And
same
it was
amount of
ton
reception.
after the catch. Yeah,
with only 10 yards per catch, so he had 300 less yards last year. Like Jalen was better at going to the tight end his first year starting than he was last year.
And Goddard has commented recently about how he's excited. Like, he thinks it. And look, if you do look at the numbers of the tight end, you just go back to last year in LA, not a flashy group of tight ends down there, but they far outproduced the Eagles tight ends with the Chargers last year. So I would imagine that Goddard has a bigger role. And who knows? I don't know. There's another position, that backup tight end spot. Goddard's a really good blocker too. People forget about that part, that he's the best blocker on the team too. They don't have that dominating.
Maybe not anymore because CJ Uzomah's here. I don't know if he's got anything left in the. I don't know if he's got anything left in the tank, but earlier in his career, when he was in Cincinnati, he was a really good blocking tight end. And he's like 6'6", 260. He's a big dude.
Yeah.
So in theory, that will enable them to play Dallas more as the flex receiver. But here's the thing. Like, if you don't have A.J. Brown, if you don't get A.J. Brown, or you don't get Devontae Smith, pick one. You got Devontae first, then A.J. And Dallas becomes that second option. And if he ever stays healthy, he's probably got 80 catches. 80, and people think of him differently. Like AJ and Devontae limit, and this will be the same thing with Saquon as well. They will limit what Saquon can do. They will limit what Dallas can do because they're the best players and they're going to get the football the most if they're out there. And that's the way it should be. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, well, listen, that's why you go back to, I don't think that Kellen Moore is going to do a whole lot of shuffling those guys here or there. I mean, they might move them around the field and do different things, but the lack of depth at wide receiver will really only rear its ugly head if somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, and then it will rear a very ugly head unless something changes. Because, look, you can never replace guys like that, but you can be better than what they have. I mean, it drops off a cliff from AJ Devontae down to Paris Campbell. That is a cliff, Mike Gill.
I'm trying to think, there's not a guy that's like in there that I'm like forgetting about, like Joseph Ngata. Like, is he a guy that has a shot?
He might be on the practice squad again. I've seen Joseph for 2 years, and you can count on one hand how many times he gets separation, even in practice. He's not the most explosive guy in the world. Johnny Wilson looks pretty explosive for his size, but obviously you can't count on a rookie. John Ross is the guy who I think you cross your fingers. Same thing.
Go back to old faithful Greg Ward, man.
Well, he's got no speed. John Ross can run, and he looks like he can play. He was a top 10 pick. We know the story. Ran a 4.22. They just the kid from Texas just broke his record this year. That's how long the record is held. I mean, he can run. As Howie would say, he's got traits in his body. But sometimes I think the Eagles get too caught up in this pedigree scouting. Bill Colarulo went down the list last year. People forget. How many times did you and I discuss on your show, Mike, about Rashad Penny? I'm like, Mike would ask me all the time, when's Rashad Penny? It ain't coming. It ain't happening. And, I think he carried it 3 times all year.
Yeah.
People were so hyped up about Rashad Penny. Now, Saquon's going to be the running number 1 back, but I'm talking about the overriding. They brought in Greedy Williams, who was a 2nd-round pick. They brought in Justin Evans, who's a 2nd-round pick. This year, they're bringing in a bunch of 1st and high-profile picks again that sort of petered out elsewhere, to be kind. Should they be doing that so much?
Well, I think that's in all sports, really, where the coach always feels that they can get the most out of a player. Like, let me get my hand. He was a 1st-round pick. He flamed out there. Let me talk to this guy. Let me get him into our system. I think all coaches in all sports trust that they're the guy that can fix or get the most out of the 1st-round pick. The first, there's a reason why a guy, I don't know, like Ryan Leaf, who really wasn't any good, just keep bouncing around from team to team to team to team, because every coach feels like, look at that arm talent. I'm the one that can kind of draw him. You remember the Hard Knocks a couple of years ago where Jameis Winston it was the Buccaneers, and Dirk Cotter was like, basically telling him in so many words, like, the team is really good. Don't F it up. Like, we don't need you to be the gunslinger. We just need to, have you just not lose us the game, if you understand what I mean. And he was just kind of looking at him like, huh? Like, that's not my style of play. That's not my style of play. But, he goes, from there in New Orleans, and teams just keep signing these guys because they feel like they're the coach that can get you to.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that's a good point. I hear the same thing with, Jameis is a good one. I'm actually a little intrigued at Sam Darnold this year because he's finally got a decent supporting cast, and more so because he got a year under Kyle Shanahan. And I thought, if Brock Purdy gets hurt, I would really like to see Sam Darnold with that offense and see what he could do. So there's always, that intriguing nature of guys who have talent to be in the top 5. And the Eagles are doing it twice. Saquon and Devin White. Yeah. I mean, they're doing it twice this year.
You got Justin Jefferson to throw to, so he's got a legit guy to help him out there. We were talking about that yesterday. Darnold or J.J. McCarthy, more intrigued by that duo or the Bo Nix, Zach Wilson Broncos. I guess Jared Stidham's out there too.
Yeah. Well, I think the Vikings want to redshirt McCarthy, and I think that's wise. I think they want to redshirt, but you know how that works. If you draft a quarterback that high and you start losing games, you can only do it if you win. If you keep winning, nobody's going to complain. But the minute they start losing, and they're not a very good team, I don't think. So you're going to probably see JJ McCarthy. But I do have a little bit of interest in seeing Sam Darnold because of the Kyle Shanahan factor. Denver's just a mess. But you know what? Sean Payton knows quarterbacks. So
that's why I have the intrigue with what happens there. Does he get his hands on Zach Wilson and turn him into something? I mean, because he obviously has the arm talent and the skill
Yeah.
set to be the number 2 overall pick in the draft, and he just was. It's
Well, how
such
about that?
terrible.
That we're talking about Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold, both former Jets, both top 5 picks. And here they
both
are
went to
again.
lousy situations. I mean, you
Yeah.
go to the Jets, you got terrible, offensive systems and players around. I mean, the offensive line terrible. And when Wilson was there his first year, I mean, they didn't have a lot. They've since built up. The team's very good now. In fact, probably a legit Super
They
Bowl
have a
contender.
great defense. Great defense. The New York Jets. And Aaron Rodgers is whatever he is, 40 now, closing in on 40. Ayahuasca, he's thinking about being vice president.
I'm 47, and if he feels anything like I do when I get out of bed, then he's not going to have as good a year as he thinks.
And he's coming off the Achilles. Yeah. I mean, I love the guy. Mike knows. I mean, anybody knows.
Yeah, I listen. He's the only reason why. Like, if Zach Wilson's the quarterback of that team, you don't think of them as a Super Bowl contender. You're giving them that tip of the cap because of him. But he's got to stay healthy.
He's another at the line. Here's an interesting, since we went down the Aaron Rodgers route. At Mike Gill's show, make sure you listen to Mike, especially if you're local down the shore, 97.3. ESPN South Jersey, the Sports Bash, 2 to 6 every day. Tom Brady, I'm sure you saw it. I probably asked you before. He had that little viral clip of sort of explaining what it is to play modern quarterback in the NFL. And basically it boiled down, and bringing up Rodgers because he's another guy who can do this. It boiled down to handling things at the line of scrimmage. And as Tom described, getting your team into the best play for that particular situation. That's how he said he judged himself, how Peyton Manning judged himself, Drew Brees, guys like that, Aaron Rodgers, etc. I think Jalen Hurts was bad at that last year, and I think that's why Kellen Moore is here. I don't want to change anything but that when it comes to Jalen Hurts. I don't want to mess with dump it off to the back, get the ball out of his hands quickly, turn him into a traditional play action quarterback. Am I right or am I wrong, Mike Gill?
Well, you would hope you're both, really. I mean, you would hope that as your experience grows, you have a better understanding of getting guys into better spots. And some of that does include that there are more options on the field. You might have been really, really good at seeing these 2 options, but to also know that teams evolve and they try to take those options away. And when they do that, you have to be able to also evolve to put your other guys in a position to say, well, if you're going to take AJ and Devontae away from me, I'm now going to go to another weapon on the field. So you have to be able to evolve your, as Brady kind of puts it, your acknowledgement of putting the guys in the right places. And also acknowledging as more tape comes out on your players, teams are going to say, well, we're not going to just let you throw the ball to A.J. Brown 10 times in this game today. You're going to have to figure out another way. So, yeah, both things can be true. Now, if teams are going to say, hey, throw the ball. Remember the first game, was it last year? AJ had all the catches. No one else had a target. And people were like, they threw the ball to A.J. Brown all day. What the hell? It was like, who the hell cares? But in that instance, if they give that to you, you take it. If they don't, can you put the other guys in positions to be able to say, if you're going to take something away from me, I'm going to go into another direction. And the dumping off of the running back isn't, I don't think, more of, I think it's because you have a weapon there. You have a guy who's a legitimate threat. If you give him the ball in that capacity, that he adds something. It's not like, we used to have in West Virginia, there was a guy, we used to call him the security blanket. You just threw him the ball because no one ever guarded him because he was slow. And you're not talking about just dumping it to a guy who has no ability after the catch. You give it to Saquon Barkley after the catch, he's going to do something for you. So that's a legitimate weapon that you are not utilizing to its fullest. Now, you might say, well, you have A.J. Brown and Smith. That's fine. But if there are days where those guys aren't available because of the way the defense is, can you adjust to utilize this other weapon that you have, plus Goedert?
Yeah.
Good stuff from Mike Gill here on Birds 365. Mike, thanks for joining the show today. Mike Gill Show on Twitter. Make sure you guys follow him there. And if you're in South Jersey, or you can download the app, as Mike said, listen to Mike on 97.3
Download the app.
ESPN.
Don't go get cool down the shore, according to Mike Gill.
No, don't.
Mike, where are you down in South Jersey? Without giving me too much information.
Yeah,
What
I
part
live
of-
in- I live in EHT.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, Mike, thanks for joining the show, man. We appreciate you being here.
See you guys.
Thanks, bud.
There's Mike Gill and Birds.
Yeah, you don't want to give out your home address.
No, not home address, but you know, there's parts of the
angry,
area
there's
where
some angry people out there.
yeah, no, I hear you.
But no, I'm joking. Yeah, I mean, Mike does a great job down the shore. So if you are going down there to get cool, if you're local, Sports Bash every day, 2 to 6, number one ranked show in the market for years, does a tremendous job. So, but it was interesting. One thing he brought up about Jalen, I do think that's the natural evolution. You know, take what the defense has given you. I think he's got to learn to do that better. That is dumping it off to Saquon Barkley. Dumping it off to Saquon Barkley. I just, at this stage, it hasn't been a strength. So, they had a guy who arguably was even shiftier last year and had proven himself as a pass receiver, as a part-time player in Detroit, and that's DeAndre Swift, and they didn't use him. And it's part of the reason why DeAndre didn't want to come back, to be honest.
Yeah, can't blame him.
And he was a proven receiver in Detroit, as I said, as a part-time player. Averaged over 50 yards, 50 receptions a year with the Lions. And again, he didn't play all the time. Really good receiver, but they didn't use him.
Johnny Mac, let's get to a break. I got a couple good topics coming up out of the break for our last hour. We'll have no guest in hour 2, so Johnny Mac and I will kick it around. First, we'll finish our running backs preview, and then I have a question. I know we did quarterbacks yesterday, but I want to pick your brain on something regarding Kenny Pickett. You guys just were talking about backup quarterbacks, and something popped into my mind that I want to run by you. I'll get your take on that. We'll finish up the running backs and a couple more questions for Johnny Mac to close out this Wednesday edition of Birds 365. Still 50 minutes left to play, so keep it here. Stay tuned, everybody. Make sure you guys like the show. It's the best thing you can do to help us grow, so we appreciate that. Stay tuned. Birds 365 will be right back.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.